Brandon, welcome to the show, bro.
Dave, glad to be here, man. It's an honor.
Yeah, man, I'm like really pumped. You and I had an opportunity to come out to a new studio today
Yeah.
and have a nice little conversation. I'm actually really excited about that. The things that were coming forward for me when you and I first connected was actually for the Unbreakable Man, and what we'll do with our conversation today. Actually, I'm really excited, man. It's like you had mentioned that you wanted to interview me, and I felt incredibly honored by that. I was like, oh, that's a good idea, dude. That's a good idea. So, but what I want to do is kind of dive into your story a little bit. And you came through the Unbreakable Man Experience. You've gone through the leadership track a bit. We've had some deep conversations about masculinity, about what it means to be a man, about just all things showing up in life. And so let's start there, man. It's one of the thoughts that I had on my heart was, when you first reached out and like the thing that called you into what I call, it's an initiation for lack of better words, but I don't even say lack of better words, but it's like, the Unbreakable Man Experience is an initiatory rite of passage.
Mm-hmm.
What called you forward, man?
Yeah. So, I've been thinking a lot about this, kind of going back to a year from now. It's like a whole different life, man, and what called me forward was really just that seeking I had. There was something that I couldn't put into words that I was striving for. And I knew that I needed someone else to help me, cause I was kind of, doing the seeking, reading the books, following some people on YouTube, kind of did the Jocko Willink, the David Goggins, and just seeking for something, I didn't really not quite know it was a retreat, but definitely was looking for like a mentor, a leader to help assist with me with that. And I think what really called me forward is just, when I met you, right? I met you through a friend, through Luke, and he introduced me to you. And then right when I had that first conversation with you prior to the retreat where we got to get to know each other, it was an hour long, I just felt super comfortable with you. And so that sort of like instant trust that was, that happened on that call, that really kind of called me forward. And it's always kind of the listening, right? The coincidences that line up that then introduced me to you, and we talked on a Sunday randomly. So yeah, I think it was just, really seeking for something deeper. And then I was looking for years prior. And then when the Unbreakable Man came to me, like in such a dramatic way, it was easy to kind of say yes.
Yeah. One of the things that called me even into create that process for men is that I felt that there wasn't an initiation for men in Western society. Like we needed that.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, I saw somebody else doing it. More specifically, I saw Garrett White, who's the guy from, it was like Wake Up Warrior. And I just saw his like promo video, and something inside, I like literally was shaking. Literally shaking while watching that. I was like, and it wasn't for me to like go to his, but it was for me to create that.
Yeah.
And I knew, I was like, that there was something deep in my soul that knew that needed to be a real thing.
Yeah.
And obviously you took the call. It's a challenge, frankly. It's, when you go through that process, you're going to get challenged. Your ego is going to get pulled out. And I always tell the guys, like going into it, it's like, this is like everything in this process you can do, like everything you can do. And like now that you've gone through it, it's like, yeah, like it actually wasn't as bad as I thought it was.
Mm-hmm.
But going into that experience, and even in your evolution or your class, there was, one of the guys, so we could talk about Brian, but it was such a funny story because like even halfway through, it wasn't even halfway, it was like kind of like the first evolution, like he almost left. Because like it was just so challenging to the ego when you take all those ideas of what we think our reality is, and we start breaking down those identities and like facing our fears, and it's incredibly challenging. And so even getting guys there sometimes is, can be challenging for them to step in. And so
getting them there and then them wanting to leave the first night.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Brian actually woke me up at midnight the first night of Unbreakable Man and said, Brandon, you got to get me out of here now. And we woke Dave up, and they talked until 2 a.m. and Brian stayed, and Brian had a huge evolution. So,
bro, I like still giggle about that conversation. He laughs about it all the time now too. And I would like, okay, so I'm this type of sleeper too, where, and this is like just for context to everybody, like we are at a retreat center and I'm in like one room, me and the facilitators are in one room and all the guys that are going through it are in another room. And, I'm really focused on my recovery so that I can be of best service to you guys showing up. And so I shut everything down at a certain hour and I was like, all right, everybody get some rest, lights out, let's go. And dude, I'm like a deep sleeper. I got like legit mouth tape. Right, I got the eye mask. I'm like out. I'm just like comatose, and it's like 1 o'clock in the morning, and it's like somebody's shaking me, and I'm like, whoa, like I'm kind of coming out of this, like and there's Brian, and you can just see the terror in his body, just like in his nervous system, because it's being shown to him, and he's like, dude, I'm leaving. I asked Brandon, to take me to the airport or at least get me down, where I can get an Uber. I'm like, cool, man. Like, have a good time, like whatever you need to do. Like, I've come to the point at this, at this juncture in what the Unbreakable Man is and like the deep challenge process. And in this case, I'm talking about that 3-day initiation because, again, it's challenging mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually. And there's like, I've had many guys like that get to an evolution and you can like see the fear come forward and they're like terrified. And so Brian is there and he's like, dude, I'm out. Like, I asked him to take me. And I'm like, cool, man, let's go have a conversation. And so we're sitting out kind of in the main room and we're chatting. And, I'm just, honestly, I was just there. Like, I just held space and let him express himself and like whatever he needed. And I was like, yeah, man, listen, like, no matter what happens, like I'm going to challenge you. Like, but you are safe in this container. I ensure that. Like, there's like nothing here that I haven't already done multiple times today. Right. And it's kind of true. It's like now that you've gone through it, you kind of know it's like everything that's there is there by design. It's there by design, actually, even in the way that it's played out. And seeing his process was so beautiful because it's like he was so terrified. But what it was showing was his ego getting in the way of the potential for his soul to come forward.
Yeah.
And when the ego gets in the way and you kind of know, it's like, that you have something on your heart, maybe in the case of, starting a new business or, changing careers or, whatever that thing might be. When the ego gets in the way of that potential, it tries to hold on. And if we resist it, the most uncomfortable suffering can occur in that. But if we can just let go and let ourselves express whatever emotions in the way or whatever trauma, the most amazing catharsis. And what's on the back end of that is so beautiful, man. It's so incredible.
I think you do a great job talking about the ego structure and then kind of, how that psychologically plays when you're approaching something new, like a new identity, a new belief.
Yeah.
And so you're saying that when you get to the edges of that ego, that's when fear kicks in. Right. And, that's what happened with Brian that night. And, just obviously because there's a group of men and you're all kind of relating to each other, obviously, and each other's experiences. But when Brian, wakes me up, I'm sleeping. He wakes me up and says like, I'm unsafe. I have to leave. And I was like, I've almost never felt more safe. Like, So there's like that difference in other people. And that's why, but you talked about the ego structure actually before that night. And so seeing that and seeing it play out, it's important when you're going through these evolutions to kind of you have a lot of mental models and stuff, but kind of understand how that process is going to go.
Absolutely.
So like when that fear does happen and then you kind of have a huge reaction, almost like a seizing up in some ways. Like Dave told me about this. Dave said this was going to happen.
Yeah.
And then obviously it helps you sink into the process more when that's how it's going to unfold.
Absolutely. And that's part of the curriculum is just helping guys see their mental models and stuff, like helping them see like, okay, this is going to happen. This is how the ego gets in the way. But like, it's also there for like framing context. And then you get into the evolution and it's almost like, it's about to happen. So you don't have to seize up as much, even though it's there. You're like, you now have awareness around that process and that ego, and that comes forward and you're like, all right. And it's like, I'll give you an example, if you've ever like did, a presentation or like, I don't know if you've ever done stand-up comedy, like a 5-minute, open mic type thing. Like I did 5-minute open mic one time, dude. It was wild. It was so wild. And And I remember like about to step up, and every cell of my body was like reverberating, and I was like, oh, I just felt so stressed.
Yeah.
And I will, I fully admit that I've gotten up in front of people for a presentation. I've completely bombed. I was like midway through, and I said a joke that I was just like a little bit offensive, like at the time. And this is like 15 years ago, even before everybody was like super offended. But for whatever reason, that like threw me off. And I was just like trying to play jokes. It was like one of our professors that everybody knew, and like he didn't care at all. Like he just thought it was really funny because he was like a hippie, super hippie dude. And I was like kind of poking at that a little bit. But for whatever reason, that threw me off, and then I completely bombed, psychologically. But anyway, going back to what we were talking about is, when you get like when that ego gets in the way, and if you let the ego get in the way, you'll bomb like in life. And it could be a presentation, it could be anything. It could just be like stepping in and making a sales call that you need to make as a business owner, or maybe asking that girl out, that could potentially be your wife, right? Whatever that thing is, it's like just go out there and see and have the experience. And in the experience, then you're going to have the most cathartic, moment of your life. You get to experience it rather than being like, oh, what could have been, what, it's a completely different opportunity or completely different moment. And so, with Brian, he his experience was beautiful because he's like, dude, I'm like, I feel so unsafe. And that was his pattern. Like his pattern was, like, I feel unsafe, I'm going to run. And I help him see that in that moment. Yeah. And he was like, all right, like I'll do this. And then obviously the next day he had one of the most cathartic expressions that I've seen. I've had some other guys that have gone through like that moment, but he was outside. For him, it was at that moment outside where, I faced him, and I looked him dead in the eye, and I put my fist on his chest, and I say, you move forward unlike you've ever moved before. And I had all you guys pushing on him, and he just, like that moment where he felt like he could, like he found the warrior within, and he knew who the fuck he was in that moment. That was beautiful. All right, so I'm gonna switch gears a little bit, and I want to kind of like ask you, some like what, obviously we identify what called you forward, but like when you came through that experience, what did you experience on the back end, and what did you notice in your own psyche? Like when you got through the Unbreakable Man, some of the major insights that you received, or some of the major like moments of wisdom, if you had to think about kind of like the moments of, we use the word healing a lot, but really that's like, it's like putting a period at the end of a sentence, right? Is the best way to describe healing, right? Psychological healing. It's like, oh, I can put that down now. It's like we're carrying a wound or a flame, and we're like, oh, this fucking hurts all the time. Like, and then you experience the essence of the flame or the pain of it, and you're like, oh, I can put that down now, and you don't have to feel that feeling anymore. So what were some of those things that came through for you when you went through the Unbreakable Man?
My theme of the retreat was the warrior. A lot of my patterns, a lot of my, what needed to be healed was a lot of, emotional withdrawn, detachment, dissociation, right? When challenges presented themselves in my life, with women, with jobs, I did a damn good job of just hiding it, and that had never happened. Hiding it from myself, right? Obviously, first and foremost. And so I had a whole bunch of, disassociations with my feelings, with what I wanted, with my own identity. Because when that process, and I guess what I was seeking was actually, the man, right? The transition from boy to man, and seeking, that which, in my opinion, what I'm here to express in this world, right? My soul actually wanted to come forward, but it needs the warrior. It needed, someone to kind of claim that and actually, move towards it. So the theme for me was the warrior. And, I was thinking, because I went on another retreat this year, and I've done a lot of inner work after the Unbreakable Man, and that was a huge launch pad, was the Unbreakable Man, but I've done a lot of work since as well. But I was thinking this week, I still haven't felt as good as I did the few days after the Unbreakable Man. I mean, the bliss that, I was just waking up and just feeling like almost like when I was a kid again, right? Yeah. Well, is a really beautiful feeling, and I haven't had anything as dramatic since still. Yeah. So for me, the theme was the warrior, and that is, being in tune with your emotions, allowing your emotions to express yourself, and really standing up for yourself, having boundaries and things like that. I mean, these are all things I didn't have because, my family was pretty chaotic, nothing new in American society, kind of the American dysfunctional society. And so I had the mindset that I didn't want to create any more chaos, because my family was doing enough of it on its own, and I wasn't going to be the one to create anything like that. So I completely just said, like, I'm not contributing any more chaos because we have enough to deal with. Yeah. So then that made me unable to ever express anything because I never wanted to add on to what my family was already going through. Yeah. And I was actually seen as the kid that wasn't going to cause any problems, right? Yeah. So something would happen. Oh, we wouldn't expect this out of you. Something your brother and sister would do, but not you, and obviously, through society, through college and everything like that, it's crazy how unconscious you can go through life in the modern world, and even college now, which, Jordan Peterson and others talked about, it's almost an extension of coddling too. I went through 4 years of a major university, finance degree, whatever, and don't really feel like I got anything out of it, or know I didn't get anything out of it, right? And these are, paying big money to institutions, and, and kind of what you're talking about, that transition to manhood. Like, I played football in high school 4 years. I went in a fraternity. I did initiation to a fraternity, graduated college, right? You would think I would have experienced something like that, right? Like, it's like, oh, I wouldn't need to go through this formal process because, I was involved. But it's crazy in our society that even with someone who played football, was in a fraternity, graduated college, had good jobs, still was actually able to be a boy, and not able to claim himself, So.
Yeah, you touched on a couple things there. One of which is, the idea that you were like, and you and I talked about this disassociation.
Yeah.
It's like the disassociation for you was the opportunity to not have to feel that pain of the chaos. Mm-hmm. And then there's all this, this chaos, and you're like, well, I view this as, we'll call this negative. So you kind of put that into that box right there, and you're like, dude, this is like, this, I don't want to deal with this, right? So it's like, okay, well, what's the best way that I can show up? And maybe it's be like the most stoic. We talk about stoicism. We can go on another rabbit hole on that. But, I can be the most like, in command, but it's a different style of command, because what you're doing is like in that moment, you're still disassociating from the sensations of your own being, your own vessel. Yeah. And you're not allowing yourself to experience those. And so what you did, you called forward, and, I want to touch on the warrior archetype. We can touch on both disassociation and the warrior archetype, but it's such a misused archetype in American society today. It's like we see guys like David Goggins and Jocko Willink, and they, don't get me wrong, like that warrior in them, like we need that, right? Like we do need that. And that is a very real archetype, but that archetype is the part of us that also goes within just as much as it goes without to protect. It goes within with that courage, the depth of courage to feel our heart and to find our heart. And it's that same courage we need that, I needed that courage. I remember when we were driving into Iraq, into country, and I was in that convoy. I remember thinking like, I've never been to war. Like, I'm fucking green here. Like, I knew it. Like, I was a young kid. I was 21. I was like, holy shit, and like, you cross that border and it just like, it's like a vibe. You feel Iraq, right? And when you're driving through and you're going, because we came in from Kuwait and we had soft-sided Humvees too at the time, dude. It's like, this is the height of 2004, where like the IEDs are everywhere. And so like, it wasn't my specific, like, so we were in 3 iterations of convoys to split up. I was in the third convoy, kind of like the legs. And then the first convoy that was ahead of us, maybe 10, 15 minutes, they had an IED explode like within about 100 yards of that convoy. And so then they had to go into a pattern. And I remember like hearing that story about my buddy who was like the gunner at the time. He was like, dude, it was fucking wild. Like, you're like, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? Yeah. But at the time they figured out it was actually a landmine that like kind of falsely went off, that, wasn't an actual like organized attack. But why I bring this up is like that courage and that bravery that was required for me to go into country is the same courage that I had to collect, that I had to find within myself to go find my heart again. And just like, when I came back home, and, you don't think anything of it. You just assume you're going to assimilate back in society.
Yeah,
well,
especially that age, right?
Yeah, especially that age. You just kind of go back to drinking and partying, and in a way, I did. I kind of let it go. I shook it off. I went out to Colorado, and I was a ski bum for a minute, and it was dope, dude. It was like absolutely my recess. I needed to go like reset, and it was awesome, and I loved it. But there's so much more psychological, kind of processes that need to happen in order to truly assimilate. And what you're describing is moving from what we call boyhood psychology, which is this sort of immature. This is like the classic Don Quixote, like go chase windmills and like, fight the windmill, right? Like you're out there womanizing and just like, like I'm gonna go drink and have a good time, and your psychological patterns will only get you so far, because what we did as a child is that we separated ourselves psychologically, and we created what we thought was good and bad.
Mm-hmm.
And even though we put things into the good or the bad, when we are being called forward by our own soul, we have to reckon with all of that which we call bad, which is what we call the shadow, which is Carl Jung calls the shadow. And so that warrior archetype was so necessary for you, in order to reassimilate and like go back in and recollect that. We can kind of wax philosophic on the warrior, but how else did did the warrior show up for you, and both in that experience and then since you've gone through?
Yeah, I mean, I think most notably since, right? Because you talk a lot about standards, right? Honoring your standards and really like having not goals, but knowing what you want out of life and going and get it, right? And that's really what the warrior is. And I'm glad you kind of elaborated on the warrior, because it's not the fighter, right? It's that which goes and achieves something, right? And so for me, since, I had a promotion at the beginning of this year, and we're kind of inadvertently, so my company acquired another company. They put me on the acquisition, but they didn't really give me a title change at first or anything like that. So quickly I was shooting above my weight internally because I work in sales, and some of the executives on the sales were wanting some of that acquisition, right? So they were like, oh no, Brandon can't get all of this. We're going to split it up. We're going to do this, whatever. And they had their own kind of way they wanted to do it, which wasn't the right way to do it. Like I'm not even coming from myself from a pocketbook perspective, but for the company and for the clients, it made no sense what they were wanting to do, but they want to chop it up so everyone gets their commissions and things like that. And so I'm just this guy, account manager title, and there's VP, CFO, all on this. And I really had to, tell them what I thought. Like, and without that warrior, or, even before that retreat, I wouldn't have done that, because I would have been like, well, it's their company, whatever, I'm just an account manager. I was given this a month ago. Like, they've been here 5 years. I've been here 1 year. But instead it was more like, no, I mean, what you're trying to do doesn't make any sense, and having that conversation, right? Because to me, the warrior comes out a lot in having difficult conversations because of my dissociation and stuff like that. Previously, having a conversation from my heart or just speaking my truth was the hardest thing for me to do. So for me, it doesn't come off as fighting or even working out. I can work out. I love working out. I don't need the warrior to work out, man. I wake up, I fucking run, whatever. It doesn't matter. I need the warrior to have conversations I don't want to have, or, to claim to claim my truth. And then obviously after that, I had to ask for a raise and stuff like that too, because they inadvertently gave me the promotion, meaning they said, here you go, Brandon, this is your new thing. But I didn't have they didn't change my title, and they didn't change my salary at first. Right. And so I did it for a month or two learning. I was like, okay, whatever. And then it came time where it's like, okay, I've done kind of some of the pre-work. Now I'm not going to wait 6 months and wait for them to give me, a salary that makes sense or anything like that. And so then, in February, March, I really had to say, hey guys, this hasn't been visited. Like, this needs to be visited. You're asking me to do something more. I need more money. Point blank.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So yeah. That's the way the warrior has come up for me, is just really that, having that difficult conversation, knowing what I want, and then getting it. And if I feel like I'm being infringed upon, the boundaries as well, which is what, to me, the job was. They're infringing on my time.
Yes.
Because I'm spending more time on this, right?
Yes.
I don't care if they were, it's not really about the money. It's like they were infringing on my time and responsibility. And so it was for me to claim, okay, well, if you're asking this from me, this is what I need.
Absolutely.
Right? And that's for me what I need, the warrior. And that's how I think of it. Because even to this day, I mean, the hardest thing that I do is still having, difficult conversations that I think are going to be with a conflicting point of view, which is obviously what we need more than anything else. But like that's still something that I don't expect it to not be challenging anytime soon, right? So
I think what you just described is probably one of the most powerful lessons that anybody can get out of an experience like that, where, it's like, yes, the warrior is there to go out there and like, command the world and like, let's go, do what we're being told to, or whether it's through your own psyche or, by somebody else. But, I use that same energy, and you have to use that energy in order to set your own standards. Like, what your standard is, your value, your worth. And, there's the passive aggressive, right? Which is like the shadow warrior. And it's like, I'm going to send this like pissy email, right? That's passive aggressive, and then there's the aggressive, which is like, fuck you guys, you motherfucker, like, but really the aggressive is also passive aggressive, in the sense that man, if we're taking that same context, that man who didn't speak up for himself, like didn't feel his own worth, didn't know his own worth, his own value, and then he doesn't say anything, and then his boundaries get pushed back so much because he's trying to people please, and he's trying to approval seek, and he's trying to be like, oh, well, they'll see my value and they'll love me. It's like, no, nobody fucking sees your value. Only you see your own value. And that's sometimes the hardest work. And so you have to do you had to do the deep introspective work of being like, yeah, I'm worth this extra dollar. Or I'm like, you can even just look at the numbers. You're like, okay, well, I'm just going to use like general numbers. Like if I'm bringing in, $1 million in sales and I'm getting paid, let's say 75K, plus commission is, whatever, 10%, whatever. It's a pretty solid little number, but you're like, wait, but I'm bringing in like, 100x more than the next guy, next to me. It's like, I need to like speak my truth on this and stand up for myself. And the warrior isn't the one that's, again, going to go out there and be aggressive, but it's actually assertiveness. That is the element of like the essence of the warrior, right? Like it's like, like we need to have a conversation. Like we need to talk.
When you feel the boundaries being infringed upon, right?
Absolutely.
And for me, one of my biggest boundaries is my time. Like when it comes to work, because you go there. Obviously, I go to work to make money, right? I mean, that's why we do that, right? So if they're taking more of my time, that's a big boundary, because I really value my time and I don't want to work more than I have to, than I need to, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, just point blank. And so I think it's more about making those stands when the boundary gets infringed upon, which part of the Unbreakable Man, you learn a lot about anger and stuff as well, and being in more touch with that, with your own power, and feeling that raw life force of anger and power, and not associating it with aggression, right? We don't have to go down that rabbit hole if you don't want to. We can. I have some questions on emotions, and we can break that down. And I think you also said it well too, which is, and you go into all the archetypes, and what we're talking about here is the king, the warrior, the magician, the lover. But you said it like the warrior shouldn't run your life, right? That's what the king is there for. And you talk about that too. The warrior is that asset of assertiveness when your boundaries get infringed upon, right? And in our society, we're all, you call it third chakra focus, but very competition, very warrior focus, right? And then this is when you talk about Jocko and Goggins, and I learned this from Krishnamurti and stuff, but they're always in conflict with something, because the warrior likes conflict in some ways. And so Jocko's like always in conflict with something that's getting him up at 4 a.m. in the morning. He's always at war.
Yeah.
And say with Goggins, right? He's always at war with himself.
Yeah.
A lot of the red pill masculinity is like you're at war with your inner bitch.
Yeah.
Right. And so you're always trying to have one leg up on your inner bitch, 24/7, can't let the inner bitch come in,
Yeah.
And I don't think, and I know you don't necessarily preach that. You have a more holistic, healthy, kind of integrated approach to it, which is why I love your approach so much. But the warrior running your life ends up in perpetual conflict, and not necessarily from a fighting standpoint, but usually like there is that which I'm raging against, right? Whether it's my inner bitch or whatever.
And you touch on the idea of enemy, right? Like, and I heard this I recently read this in a transformational leadership book. And one of the things that they talk about in transformational leadership is, of the many tenets, there's 7 tenets, and I don't want to go through all of them just yet, but one of the main tenets is that if you want to cultivate a culture that is transformational, have a common enemy, right? Like a common enemy could be like Democrats, it could be Republicans, it could be people that are engineering climate change, it could be, it's like
have an enemy,
like have a common enemy. And I really sat with that, like, and what you're describing is like,
and it was promoting that, it was saying you should have that.
Yeah, okay. Because what that does is that galvanizes individuals in it's a psychographic a capitulation for individuals who believe in one ideal or have certain beliefs and values. Basically what it does is it galvanizes individuals, because it brings out the warrior, and I was really sitting with that. I was like, do we have an enemy, right? Like, and in a way, like what I came down to, and it took me a minute, I'll be honest, like, cause I was, there's both external, right? There's external enemy, which is like, if you think about like just Republicans, Democrats as a thing, like Republicans see Democrat as enemy and Democrats see Republican as enemy, which is, again, it's like a false enemy, but that's what they think. And then there's an internal enemy, which is what you're describing is the inner bitch.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, if you're in a mastermind, like a business mastermind, you could say procrastination is the enemy. You could say, like self-sabotage is the enemy. And I really sat with it, and I really felt that for me, powerlessness, which is giving away our power and letting external circumstance run our thoughts, our feelings, and our actions, that for me was, I'll call it enemy, right? Like, which is the thing we're going up against. That's the idea. Now, again, this is kind of free form right now. It's like, it's kind of what I got to, where it's like, okay, well, if I put if I look at the way someone's treating me or saying something, and I feel, I think, and I act a certain way relative to what they are, I'm giving away my power.
Yeah.
I'm no longer responsible. I'm now reactive to what they're saying. And so for me, it's almost like a recommanding one's inner sanctum, recreating your not even recreating, but just reclaiming your sovereignty as an individual. And so it's, it took me a while, and maybe that's, could change, and the idea, but it's moving from competition to cooperation, moving from that third chakra of competition to the heart chakra, which is openness and reckoning with your own inner demons, right? It's like, it's kind of, that was kind of the thought.
Yeah.
There's something to chew on. We could chew on that as we go, but
I love it. No, that's good.
Let's let me like just kind of wrap up the section with kind of interviewing you relative to the Unbreakable Man and what you got out of it. And if you had to think about the man you were, right? Like what you were struggling with, what the pain points were, what were you struggling with, and then what happened in those 3.5 days that you went through the Unbreakable Man. And now how's that showing up? I mean, obviously you shared a few things about being able to hold standards and boundaries and getting the money you want, right? That's a perfect example, man. It's like getting the money you want, being like, I'm valuable, I'm gonna have this conversation. But what else is coming through for you, if you had to think about that?
I was so, and obviously people all show up to the Unbreakable Man for different reasons, and like for me, like I'm definitely more inclined on the spiritual seeker side, just kind of more my nature. I mean, not everyone that shows up to Unbreakable Man is. It's completely, unique to what that person wants, right? And for me, I mean, what I was going through prior was just really, I think it was that not having an identity, and so like the word that keeps coming up is just lost, lost. And I had moved to Austin in April, packed up my van, started driving west, stopped in Austin because I had a friend here. Just had a 3-month lease to start out with. Loved Austin, so ended up getting a 1-year lease. But obviously part of that drive is you're searching for something, right? That's why you pack up your van and move. You're like, something's not right here, so I'm just gonna drive, keep finding a place until something rings home. And I went to New York City, I went to California, before all that drive, and there was just sort of just like nothing felt right. Yeah. So I mean, before it was just very lost, and when I moved to Austin, even all the way up until the Unbreakable Man until December, I still hadn't found what I was looking for. I loved Austin because Austin's a beautiful town, great people, but I hadn't found like, really good friends or much community or wasn't even really that involved. I work remotely and my firm's based in Florida. So I don't, see people day to day here. And so obviously when you move to a new town, that makes it hard, especially because I didn't know anyone. So, for me, I was just very, very lost on just, like I said, changing kind of my identity. Wasn't drinking as much, just because I get tired of all that. And so I was changing a lot, like in my values and stuff like that, but I didn't know where it was going. And I also kind of had that good bad where I was like, I'm quitting drinking, but then now I'm not doing anything, right? Now I'm just sitting home alone, which is even not a good feeling either, right? So there was just so much I was naturally, my psyche was progression, I think, more towards, being a man. And obviously, when you're transitioning from boy to man or any identity to a new identity, there's naturally a part where you have no identity, right? It's not like, oh, I was this and now the next day I'm this. It could be many months, and one of my friends who, he reached out to me after my first podcast, 24, 25-year-old man as well. He reached out to thank me because he was like, wow, I'm going through the same thing. Like, I don't enjoy going out anymore. I don't enjoy doing that. So I'm just at home reading, and like you just saying that, helped a ton because I'm going through it. And it's like a year or two process, right? I guess what people don't understand about these transitions, you have a seminal moment like the ritual, the event, which is massive. But that actually, because like when your consciousness is changing from that previous identity to a new identity, it takes a long, long time. And then like it's slowly we're like, oh, you're going out and then you're just not having any fun anymore. And then like you maybe keep going out a couple more times because you know what else to do. And then you just kind of, then the emptiness comes up because naturally like it's your soul is like, this ain't it anymore, and that's where that emptiness comes from. And then naturally you don't have, the new identity hasn't emerged yet. So you had that period of no identity. And so for me, the Unbreakable Man was just amazing because it was, pretty much when I was in that state of no identity, which is one reason why it was so great of an experience, because I was, I was a clean slate, and so that's, why the warrior theme was so instrumental for that, because, the warrior is all about claiming that identity and then doing what you need to move forward towards that. So, I mean, and while I was going through as well, a lot of it's also a, which we talk about healing the past, right? There's naturally always patterns, relationships that are holding you down, right? That's, and I think I was going to ask you this question. You kind of talk about it now. Like some people, it's not necessarily trauma. There's always conditioning, right? And so it doesn't necessarily have to be something, like a sexual trauma or something like that. Like we have all splintered in some way, right? Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. 100%, absolutely.
So like, there's this, and so like for me, it was, my relationship with my father, which was a big part of the retreat. And then, also this sort of resentful for that, the boy, I had like a resent for the boy, right? I was kind of like, this guy was lazy, he procrastinated, he could never stand up for himself. Fuck that guy, right? Which I think is actually part of it, which if you can talk about that beautiful video that was from the last retreat about that, and we can talk about more about the psychology was happening, but I had a lot of resent actually for that previous self as well. And so, and then obviously, as we talked about, a guy who also couldn't stand up for himself as well. So, there was a lot of things, and through the rituals and through the relationship that is built with the brothers there and the safe space, you can really do a ton in 3 days. It's really hard to put into words, and it's different for everyone, but that's really was just mine.
That's incredible. And
mine was like a lot of power, mine was just a lot of just like, the last 5 years, I've just been massive repression, right? So it all comes out. Yeah.
And that's a very common theme among men, and especially, resenting the boy. It's like you see, it's almost like you put your sights on the idea of who you can be, and we visually can see it. It's almost like the guy on the other side, and we kind of like then have to sit with ourselves and be like, fuck, like all these like parts of us. And this happens to me still, and it's like every once in a while I'll kind of catch myself like pissing on myself, like just so irritated with where I am, when in reality, like I am me, and like I am beautiful as who I am. And it's so common for men to see that, right? And like want the next thing, like they want to go on the journey and like go become who they think they want to be, so they no longer have to feel what they're experiencing, that parasitic tension that lies inside of him. It's almost like a visceral, like irritation, you know, it's like you can feel it. And so, let me ask you, man, like, do you feel like of the things like the identity and the, the boy and the, the power, like, do you feel like you found what you wanted?
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's something you can always draw upon. Yeah. Like I said, like really feeling that power in the film when that power comes up and noticing it, and obviously like with anything you have to keep practicing it and it kind of ebbs and flows to a degree as well. But that, that raw sense of power that you feel in those moments have definitely come up, since. And then like, we should talk about, right, you appreciating and stuff as well, right? And you just really get to like when I feel that way, and sometimes I just kind of want to express myself, and maybe I just want to like, I'm just in my living room and I'm just feeling like I just want to like, roar or yell or do something like that. Just fucking do it. That's why I learned a lot about you. Just express yourself when those energies kind of come up. I mean, when that kind of warrior comes online, it's a great feeling. I mean, it's a really good feeling. And so I learned a lot from you. It's just that inner safety to express too, because obviously I think I would, we're so good at judging ourselves and stuff. And if I'm home alone and I feel like roaring is like, why the fuck would I do that prior to your retreat, And then with your retreat, it would be like, hell yeah, because I fucking feel like it,
Absolutely. Yeah, dude. That's the way that's the way to go, man. Like that is, if there's any one thing that I want men to walk away with in this program and even in.
And that's freedom, by the way, too, you talk about too. Yeah.
And that's pure freedom. Like that's truly what freedom is. And that's truly what power is, right? It's like, you can't, like, you don't need to let anyone or anything outside of you dictate how you think, feel, and act.
Yeah.
Right. That's fucking power. And then with great power comes great responsibility, right?
Mm-hmm.
As Uncle Ben from Spider-Man said. It's such a rant. Like that one line was it's so like iconic now in the zeitgeist of human society. But when you allow yourself just to be you and you can hold space for yourself, of like like you no longer, as you're saying, like you no longer judge yourself. And you can just be free, and like that is like the essence of freedom. If there's if there's like an essence, that is it. It's feeling so safe within your own vessel to be who you are, like your truth, right? Like who the fuck that is. And it takes some, some tilling. It takes like some moments of like, oh fuck, I gotta go find who I am, right? And even asking the question, which is a deep question, like, who am I? Like what is that guy?
That's usually the beginning of the journey, right?
That's always the beginning, man. That's like I got the lesson, here I am. So, that's the fun part though. Like when you are on the journey, and you're finding it and you're obviously uncovering, you're going to see some things that you frankly just didn't want to have to see, it's like, but that's the gig, but that's how you find yourself, asking the question. It's like, when Gandalf comes and he gives the ring to Frodo and he's like, you need to go to Mordor and return this back into the fire. It's like, bro, that's just you asking yourself the question of who am I? Yeah. That's all that's like,
oh, wow,
that entire scene is like that, like what you just described. It's like, oh fuck, who am I?
Yeah.
And so to go face, ogres and dragons and demons and like go down into the literal cave, what he saw, like, the dragon with the gold, and that's the gold represents like your truth, your soul, and the dragon is like all of the reasons, the ordeal, right? It's like the ego that stands in the way of you being who you truly are.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily a fighting of the dragon, but rather a surrendering to the dragon and letting it. And in the psychic space, right? Like we oftentimes like try to fight. There was actually a guy that came through our last event. He saw a dragon during one of the revolutions. Wow. Or evolutions. He saw a dragon in the psychic space. And mind you, like we don't use any psychoactive compounds at this, right? It's just like, I'm gonna just tell you, it's like breath. It's like breath work.
Yeah.
We're gonna do a lot of breath work. And he saw this dragon, and he was like calling on all these warriors, and like he chopped it up, and
oh wow.
And I was like, that's beautiful, man. Next time let it consume you. And he was like,
oh wow.
And he was like, oh fuck. Like that's the great challenge. Let it consume you. Surrender to it. And in the consumption, your light, your seed of consciousness, of love will be planted into it. and then all of a sudden it just gets it's like a enveloping rather than an explosion. It's like it like inverts on itself, and you instantly integrate that shadow. You instantly integrate that which you were running from, and you no longer have to be afraid of that part of you, which could be assertiveness. It could be the killer within. It could be like that darkness that knows how to go into the depths and like is terrified of yourself.
So this is awesome, because I was thinking that was a good thing that he chopped up the dragon when you first said it, but that's another way of kind of avoiding your shadow. So in this story, right, the dragon is an aspect of his shadow, right?
Yeah.
A symbol, an image of his shadow, and instead of letting it consume him, right, understand what it is, integrate it, he instead fought it.
He fought it, yeah.
Okay.
But the fighting is still an opportunity to protect the self. It's to protect the inner child. We oftentimes bring the warrior on at a very young age as a guardian. And that guardian was there because maybe there was some chaos in the home. Maybe there was some financial traumas, or there was some, you saw abuse or whatever, that situation. And so the guardian comes forward and it says, I'm going to protect you. And even at a young age, like that guardian comes on and is like, again, this is in the psychic space. We have all these characters, for anybody listening, it's like we have all these, like, internal family systems does a great job of this, but basically what happens is like we have all the characters of the Lord of the Rings is perfect example of a story. It's like, it's there as a guardian, but in reality the thing it's going to heal and really honor the dragon is not in the fighting it and chopping it up, because it'll just return because it's there still. It's actually in the surrendering and letting yourself be destroyed by it, and knowing that inside of you is the light of consciousness, the light of God itself. And again, like I said, it instantly, but it's terrifying. It's terrifying to do that work. And I've done that a couple times. I saw this fucking fiery demon in me at one time in my psychic space. And I was like, I was weeping out of fear. Like, I don't know if I can do this. And like, I don't know who was talking to me in my own mind, but it was like, you can do it. Like, you can, like, it was like my own psyche or my own version of self was like keep going, keep feeling, keep surrendering. And I like surrendered, and it just felt like this, and I just like shook, and I was like, oh, these moments in when you're in that release and you're like, oh, and it's like coming through you. And I just felt like I wanted to vomit, like, oh my God, I'm terrified, and then on the back end of it, I was like, holy shit. Like, it's almost like you're cracked into a new, and you like rise again from the ashes. And that's the story of the phoenix, right? Like the phoenix is destroyed, it burns, and then from the ashes, it rises again. And that's, again, just psychically, again, in the psychic space, when we were talking about, everybody like has these moments of separation. Literally everybody does. And what happens is you break down and you think, oh, well, that part of me is bad, that assertiveness. Maybe I, reached in and hit my brother when, he stole my cupcake or whatever as a child. And I was scolded for that. Like, let's say that as an example. Yeah. Well, if I'm punished for my assertiveness and I keep getting punished enough times, well, I'm going to shut that assertiveness down, because that is considered bad in the eyes of the gods, right? The gods being your parents at the time, and we put that, unfortunately, it both fortunately and unfortunately, it's like just part of the mystery of being human. It's such a funny thing, age 0 to 7, we don't have a prefrontal cortex, and we can't rationalize anything, and so everything is emotionalized and internalized, and then we view everything as both good or bad, because we physically have to survive. We physically need someone outside of us to support us, mentally, physically, emotionally, right? Because we don't know how to like process things ourselves. And so we continue that. And so the process of maturation, what you're talking about with going from boyhood to manhood, is actually reclaiming everything, right? Like reclaiming your own mental power, physical power, emotional power, spiritual power. And what that is doing is like, you no longer are reliant on literally anything or anyone outside of you to know your truth, know who you are, to know and assimilate that which you truly are, which is both shadow and light. Yeah. And it's in going through the shadow that we reintegrate, and we allow ourselves then to reemerge as the I call it the Unbreakable Man. It's just a cool word, man. I just like came up with that word that like one day, and I was like, that's truth. That's right. Right. All right. So, anything, man, like anything else, like, you know, if you wanted to add for anybody listening, if they're thinking about coming through like an initiation or just even joining our brotherhood, anything you would share kind of before we switch roles here and have you?
Yeah, no, and I can even kind of expand on that with a question I have for you. And I mean, one reason why I want to have this podcast with you as well, and just obviously really excited to see where the Unbreakable Man goes, is just because the difference in what you're doing versus like what I see like in the red pill masculine movement and things like that. Like you're really, like what you're doing in my mind's just very different. Like, you know, it really is. And it's really special. And like to expand on that, I have a couple points. And that is one, you know, I remember from your last retreat, one of the wives had reached out to you about her husband's experience. And she said, you know, I expected my husband to come back more of a man, but instead he came back happy.
Yeah.
That's like kind of a paradox, right? Because as a man, right, maybe you're not supposed to be happy. And then I'll just say, like, to the second point too, which we talked about too, is like you're also like you're preaching freedom in a way that doesn't usually become ascribed to masculinity, which I know you talk about discipline as well. And then, like I said, well, this is a big question. I think it's worth getting into all of it. But you know, when you think about the red pill movement or anything, like, you know, there's like a inherent constraint to masculinity, and that's what makes the man, right? It's this boom, very constraint. Yeah, I guess we could kind of a little bit talk about the difference in your version of masculinity versus maybe modern day, and kind of like also if you could touch upon like the constraint as being conventional masculinity versus freedom is opposite of constraint, right? So like there's some paradoxes here, I think, that's worth unfolding.
Yeah, I think that's a great place to start too, because, you know, in society there is this sort of false, you know, ideal of masculinity, of what masculinity is. And keep in mind, like, we learn from our fathers and their fathers and their fathers and their fathers, and they were coming through some very dark times, and they had to survive. Like, they just did. It's like we did not have just like the instantness that we have in this modern society, whether you think that's good or bad, right? You know, it's like there is no good or bad. So in growing up, you know, like for our fathers and grandfathers, etc., they were hyper focused on making sure that food was on the table, and like, so for them, consciously getting to that level of competition was of highest importance. And if I can win the game of being human, aka survival, then I'm going to win. I can win the game of being the animal, right? Like, I can, you know, be competitive, I can have desire, I can ensure my own safety, and I can win. And the more I win, then the safer, quote unquote, the safer I get. But then there's still this lack of fulfillment. And so in this day and age, because everything is readily available, we you know, we're given the opportunity, like, you know, again, Gandalf coming with the ring, we were given the opportunity to start asking deeper questions, because all of our needs were met psychologically. If we think about like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like all of our needs were met psychologically, or not psychologically, but our needs were met physiologically. Yeah. And so we now had the question of being like, oh fuck, I'm really unfulfilled. What do I do? Like, this is weird, you know? And like, then we started kind of feeling the tension now of our soul. And what I always say is, like, if you have a calling on your heart and you know that you want to go, let's say, build a business, and that business is, you know, like, or you want to be an actor. Let's just take Brian as an example. Brian, we're talking about the Brian that wanted to leave the retreat, right? So he wanted to be an actor, and he wasn't pursuing his acting career, but he was a counselor because he knew he was good at it, and it was his, like, kind of his safety net. But he knew that is what my soul is calling me to. And the more he resisted it, the more tension. It's almost like, think of it like two poles, right? And between the two poles is a rubber band. And that rubber band is the internal tension you feel, right? And the further you get away from your soul's calling, the harder life becomes. Because then instead of us just absolutely allowing ourselves to experience that, typically, right, we numb that tension. We numb it in many ways. We can numb it. And so we'll go to a doctor because we have symptoms, and we'll go to the doctor and we'll say, well, I have depression and anxiety and this and that. And they're like, okay, well, here's this pill and here's that pill, and don't do that and do this and all these things. And like, so the tension, the symptom goes away, but the call on the soul, on the heart, is still there.
Yeah.
And it's not going away. So that tension is still there. And so Brian, bless his heart, he was going through some dark stuff, man. And it's like, and I'll raise my hand, and I was going through some dark stuff, and I'll speak on myself here really quick, just for context. It's like when I knew who I needed to be, which is who I now am, right? when it was like made in my awareness, but I wasn't allowing myself to go there because of all the identities of like, oh, I need to be a man, and I need to be a provider, I need to be a good husband, and yet, like, ironically,
your model reality is just way different than that, right?
Absolutely, right? Yeah. And so what I was doing is pushing myself away, so I needed to numb, and I numbed in overworking, in like basically hyperactivity. I would like overdo it, and then I would feel stuck, and then I would overdo it, and then I would feel more stuck, and then I would like go through these cycles of like shadow. There's almost like repression, in my own sense. And then I would numb with TV. I would numb with porn. I would numb with sports. Sports is a big one that nobody talks about.
Yeah,
sports,
or overactivity, right?
Overactivity,
the endurance community a ton.
Absolutely. Everybody's like, oh yeah, you're really healthy, but like they're actually like just completely sacrificing their soul to this idea.
Paul Chek has a quote: "No amount of exercise will, release the past, release the pain of the past." Right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And so like we constantly go into, like this sense of numbing, and so because we feel this parasitic tension, which is like our soul calling us forward, right? It's like, again, we are just creating a pole of where we are to who we know we can be, our own potential. We'll just call it potential. A lot of people resonate with the word potential, and it's like, I love that word because it's one of those scientific words that everybody agrees upon, but it literally can never be measured. If you think about the scientific method, quick side note, you cannot measure potential, but everybody knows it exists.
Yeah, well, potential zero, right?
Exactly.
It's like they're like, what is it? But you can't get rid of it, and everything is from zero, and then everything.
Absolutely. And like nobody can, like, it's like, how do you measure love? Like the depth of love and like all the different ways, and we can put names to it. It's like you can't measure that, but we know it exists. That's why I love. I'm a scientist at the end of the day, but I'm also I'm also very interested, and I heard this earlier, is like the lack of evidence is not the evidence of lack. Meaning, if you don't have if we don't have a scientific method around the afterlife and near-death experience and know like what's going to happen, it doesn't mean that doesn't exist. It just means that the potential is there, and so everything exists. Okay, that was a quick side note, deep thought to chew on, but kind of going back to masculinity. So therefore, we were given the standards of masculinity, which is kind of stops itself at competition, right? Again, it's physiologic needs, safety, security, making sure that. Then the second level is desire, right? The third level is competition. I'm going to go out and I'm going to win. And then the fourth level now is openness, right? It's openness and it's service, right? When I say true service, I mean service to the greater whole from the essence of love.
Yeah,
it's
the heart.
It's the heart.
Yeah, and you're walking up the chakras.
You're walking up the chakras, right? You're walking them up, right? These energy centers. You're just getting to that level and going from the third center, which is competition. And here's the thing, like the first three are not bad. They're actually very important, very vital. I love competition. In fact, competition is still an incredible component to tap into. And that's where like tapping into the common enemy, but not getting wrapped into the common, like the fight against the enemy. Because oftentimes we get wrapped up into the fight against the enemy. We're kind of talking about enemy earlier, where, we can oftentimes get stuck in, well, we're fighting against, like, if you're, if it's genuinely in your interest to create a cooperative society, well, you would think, or a more progressive society, you would think that republicanism or conservatism is the enemy. And so therefore you kind of get wrapped up into that, even though altruistically you see that, a more cooperative or socialistic, progressive society is a better society for all, even if, in your heart, right, altruistically it is there. It's very easy to get wrapped up into the competition end of it, rather than actually being that which you seek, right? Be the change you want to see in the world, right? Rather than being the change you want to see in the world, you'll just kind of go and fight against what you don't want, which then brings
or not change because this is just the way it is, right?
Yeah.
The capitalistic competition capitalism kind of,
yes.
Which is kind of like the downfall of capitalism to some degree, is that heart's calling for change or a new possibility, but the third chakra only knows, what has already seen the past.
Absolutely. And so instead of, again, ascending and going into what we consider now love, which is holding space for all that is, and also expressing yourself as who you believe you want to be, how you want to express in the world, you now are still there fighting, quote unquote, fighting against the enemy. You're still in that level of competition. So going back to masculinity, we were given a certain level of standard for what we believed masculinity was from, again, our forefathers. And we thought that being weak or being emotionally vulnerable was weakness. We were shown that that is because in competition, and I'll tell you, man, like when I was in country, like you can't break down and cry. Like there was no crying, right? There was no like emotions, right? Like you got to push it away. And yes, we had conversations. And I remember I literally actually led a class. This was like way before my time of going deep into my own emotions. But I had to lead a class because all the NCOs, which is what's called a non-commissioned officer, like the enlisted leaders, we all had to teach a class, and everything from gun safety to I chose combat stress. Just something called me. I was like, I'm gonna teach this one. We talked about stress. We talked about stress release and all these things. And in those moments, right, you cannot express your emotions. Even though people are like, we live by emotions, like absolutely, that like runs the human experience. Like think about it, without emotion, you don't have an experience. Like that's the experience, that's the gig, And so when we like are taught that, okay, this is weakness, we now must be competitive instead of cooperative, which is the one level up. We actually don't create brotherhood. We don't create belonging as men. We create competition. And if you think about like just the idea of being a man in modern society, like I know that when I walk down the street, other people around me don't feel safe. Like I just know it. Like it's like an interesting thing. And I've succumbed to that, right? Like I've honored that, but like I know that I'm safe. And like I can soften my vibe and people can walk near me. But a lot of people, and like especially if a woman is walking on the sidewalk towards you, they'll take the long way around.
Yeah,
they'll walk onto the street, especially during COVID too. It's like a lot of people like give that leeway.
Yeah,
it's very interesting nowadays. How like people are like really giving each other space.
Yeah,
because like we're all
afraid of each other.
We're afraid of each other now, right? And we know, especially for men, typically what we'll do is we still very much feel the energies of masculinity. We'll talk about energy of masculinity here in a second, but one of those energies is the warrior. And we will then use the warrior to guard our heart, so then we guard our emotions. We no longer, and we also like have this innate call in our bodies, like our it's like an inertia almost to protect, to provide, to be the beacon of safety, kind of create that safe space for everyone else around us. If there is emotional, like lack of emotional safety in the case of like when you were a kid and you saw the chaos, if there is that, now all of a sudden you don't feel safe. And so then you got to put up your guard. And so then you're always on guard, right? And you think about even the warrior that's always on guard, like what does that create? Tension and like distress. And then heart disease and cancers start to show up. It's like just like the physical symptoms start to show up and break us down as men. And so, I don't like to use the word traditional masculinity, but sort of like, we'll call it, the old paradigm.
Okay. So not today's like conventional, but more what happened the last 100 years kind of.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I mean, thousands of years, really.
Yeah,
it's like ever since we've been in the dark ages. I mean, you can go all the way back to, kind of right after the fall of Greece, and then like kind of when Rome started to pick up, and you kind of look at the way, and even like the way we lived in Rome was still very different than the way we live now. It's like some things were good, some things are bad, whatever. I don't want to get into Rome. That's not my expertise, but just the prescription for masculinity. Now, a couple things I want to touch on. There is biological male and female, right? Biologics, right? We're just talking about XX chromosome and XY chromosome. It's just the objective reality of what is male and what is female, right? Man and woman. This is really important. This is a really important distinction because, there's a lot of conversation around what is man and woman nowadays. So there is the objective, and then there is the subjective. Now, the objective, if I think about chair, I'm sitting in chair exists. But if we look at the totality of things, chair does not exist, right? Chair is a thought form. Again, this is just deep, so just follow me on this for a second. Chair is a thought form because this neither was created nor destroyed, right? It's like it just is energy being held together by other energy. And if this gets destroyed, let's say in a fire, did it ever exist, right? If I forgot that the chair was here, did it ever exist? And so therefore now it's like, well, now we're going on story. Now we're getting into the subjective space, right? So there is the objective, which we think is bone and skin and right, like the matter, right? Male, woman, or man, woman. We have to honor that, right? We have to honor that. We have to honor the objective. Like, this is really important because a lot of people are like fighting against this, but people are also getting really wrapped up into the objective, saying that that is the only reality. And that's not the only reality, which I'll get to in a second. The other reality is also the subjective. The subjective is actually where the reality really exists. It's the visual space, the psychic space. It's the dream space. It's the space in between space, right? It's the experience of life, the subjective. And so on a subjective level there is biological male, female. On the subjective level, there is masculine and feminine, right? Now, again, these are subjective. And so you can experience both masculine and feminine. These are experiences that we have within our vessel, right? We feel these are experienced psychologically. And so when we feel them. And so masculinity as a thing is an energy. Tap into that. We can tune into it, and it holds a tone, right? It holds like a woof, like a, like a steadfast, it's like there is light and there's dark within that tone. That darkness is, if you're integrated with it, you are, as an example, like I've seen some dark shit in my life. I saw bodies getting pulled out of Humvees and, in body bags and blood spewing out everywhere. And it's like, and then that Humvee turns around and goes right back out to the fight. It's like, it's some wild shit, but it the dark masculine was required for me to witness the darkness and still fight for the light. And so when I say fight, I don't, again, it's a context term in this moment. But so the reason I bring that forward is because a lot of people are confused about masculinity must be, right? Just for the context of this conversation, like masculinity must be for men. And I got into, I don't want to say an online fight, but like there was this channel on Instagram that was talking about like, it's not okay to be feminine for men. And I was like, nope, that's not true. Like, you can be as feminine as you fucking want. Now you can't argue like what male and female is. Like, and a lot of people are like kind of melding the psychic space with the physical space. Yeah. And that creates a lot of like misunderstanding. And so like the two spaces are both simultaneously separate and also the same. Again, deep thought of the day. But it's really important to identify what masculinity truly is. It's an energy that is on the same pole, on the opposite pole of femininity. And femininity is, we'll call it the effervescent flow of life force energy itself. Yeah. Masculinity is the banks by which it allows for the flow. So if you think about the polarity of a relationship, we as men in general, we hold the masculine, we hold it well through whatever you want to call it, biochemical, testosterone, steroid within us, right? All the, the androgens. We generally, in general, we hold the masculine container, and for our female partner, I should say in general, and these are energies. And the feminine really is, brings life. It brings life force. It's like for men, for masculine men, like they crave that shit. It's like they crave the unknown, the total, catharsis and the chaos of that which is the feminine. But we really want to be there to hold space and see it move, see it dance. It's like the dance of a flame is the feminine in itself being expressed. So all of this to be said, traditional, we'll call it, kind of, there's got to be a better word here, but I don't even like to use the word traditional masculinity, but just like the old version of masculinity is a version that was given to us that is being challenged. And what we prescribe to, right, at the Unbreakable Man is like simply, let's just move past this idea of competition. Let's create cooperation. Let's reckon with our own pain, our own wounds. And the new version of masculinity is steadfast. It's open-hearted. It's still strong as fuck. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, if somebody came after my family, I'd kick some ass, right? Like, you would see, Killer Dave come out, right? Like, the head warrior is there. Yeah. But it's not that I have to live in that, because I'm not terrified of what somebody thinks about me, because I feel completely free within my own body, knowing that I can dance and be totally wide open and just dance in a park, right? And just flow and move. And so does that mean that I'm feminine? No. It just means that I know how to experience femininity within my own vessel, and I'm balanced. So I would say I have integrated both masculine and feminine within my own body. And I know the difference, and I know what the feeling is. And so I can call on any one of those sensations and utilize it at any time.
Yeah. Now everyone knows why I love this guy so much. I have like so many questions, but
yeah, please.
No, I mean, but there's almost nothing else that needs to be said than that either, though. You know what I mean? Obviously, we could keep dancing and keep expanding and stuff as well. And this is why, I wanted to do this and keep getting your content out there, because it's so different. And I think that, where do I want to go with that?
Well, let me touch on one thing, and I'll add to it. I don't want to cut your thought off, but it's it is ultimate freedom for men when they're no longer afraid of themselves.
Yeah, just because we said at the end, you give yourself permission to be both feminine and masculine, right? It's just total freedom of both, and the constraints is and maybe you can expand on that. Why do men typically cut that off from themselves, or why do I think what the original question before you elaborated on the objective and the subjective was freedom versus constraint, whereas there's some sort of natural constraint with, you don't like calling it traditional masculinity, but it's almost like maybe men more than women feel the need to cut themselves off from that, and women don't seem to have that problem. And there's a quote I love where women are, but men have to become.
Yes.
Right. So there's just something natural in men that say, not that. Right. Whereas women just seem to just naturally just be themselves. Right. Just like dancing, you say. Whereas maybe because we are so boundary focused, as kind of our role, or masculine energy's role, right? Is the boundary, the container, and that's why we're like that. But why are men so damn good at putting constraints on themselves?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about what masculinity is, it is containment. It's like the constraint within itself. And so, when I've heard that before, where women don't necessarily need a process of initiation.
Yeah,
they just are. And you could argue motherhood is in its own right an initiation, but for men, because of the nature of masculinity, and we'll call it we manipulate the world. Again, masculine individuals manipulate the world physically. We do, and we can destroy, just fucking tear shit down. And it doesn't mean that women can't, but in general, right? We manipulate the world physically. It's also how the shadow is expressed, and why people are so pissy about, anytime there is something that is physically damaged, because we can see it with our eye, we can experience it, that there's a lot of, it's very grandiose in that moment. And then on the other term, when it comes to femininity, women manipulate the world psychically. And so it's also the reason why women hold grudges. And they get really pissed. It's they'll talk shit. They're a gossiping drama. They'll really cut each other down.
Yeah.
And it cuts hard. It really cuts hard. And so women are generally more in the psychic space than men, even though men get in their heads, because our nature is in the physical. It's why guys can beat each other up, and then an hour later they can have a beer together.
Yeah.
They can just go, and they're like, oh, that was a good fight, chap. They'll just be like, oh yeah, that's totally chill. Because they don't hold grudges, because they kind of got their willies out. Now that comes with a bit of responsibility, right? We as men have to be guided through the process of our own darkness, which is our how we can damage the world. And if we don't, then we will succumb to the shadow within, which is the fear of our own self. And there's an old African proverb, which is if you don't initiate the boys, they'll burn down the village.
Yeah.
And I heard that once. I was like, oh my God, that's so fucking true. Which is, if you don't initiate yourself into a higher purpose or service, and use that which is your life force energy, especially men, to create containment and create structure. We'll just use it as the word structure. If you don't really tap in and identify how you can now show up and create that structure in the world, and bring your life force energy for something that is improved, that creates improvement for everyone around you, which is the ultimate sense of service. If you don't do that, you're just going to destroy yourself, and you're going to take the fucking house down with it.
Yeah.
And you think about modern day men, and I use the word like man, we'll just say man boys.
Yeah. Old boys, 40-year-old, 50-year-old boys. I mean, they're everywhere.
Absolutely.
Everywhere.
Absolutely, man. And like, dude, like there was a guy that lived next door to my sister. This is kind of a funny story. He's 30, kind of mid 30s. I don't know exactly how old he is, but you could definitely tell that there wasn't a father figure really readily available. And I'm sitting at my sister's house, and this is in Minnesota, where like kind of houses are pretty close to each other. And I'm literally sitting out on her back patio, having a cup of coffee, 7:00 in the morning. And I look over, and on the big screen TV, because you can see it, is this dude's watching porn. And it's like 7 a.m., bro. And I'm like, bro, this guy's getting after it right now. Like 7 a.m. Like, what? Let's go.
He didn't sleep.
Like, he just didn't sleep, He's just like, that's, and I saw him like, a couple days later.
Late night grinding,
night grinding, for sure, dude. Like, he was up playing video games all night. And I'm like, and here's the thing, man, like, and I don't want to bash on it too much, because it's like, there is no good or bad. But what it does is it illuminates that the reason for which I work is to make sure that men, number one, know who the fuck they are, and they have the power within them to create worlds for the world, for like the entire planet.
Such a gift.
Yeah. And like that, like if there's a mission that I am driven for, it's helping men know that they all have a mission. Like we all have a dharma, we all have a purpose.
Yeah.
For that which we should bring. And when we honor that, like when we truly honor it, it is the greatest and most challenging journey of our life, because what it does is it forces us to reckon with all the parts of ourselves, our psyche, that we're terrified of, and for us to now show up as that individual. That's why I always say, like, let's fucking find that thing. What is it? I'm going to guide you through the waters to get there, and you're going to go on a journey. But then when you show up and now you're, the entrepreneur who can open up that nonprofit that can, put $1 million for homeless people, or even, I think, again, we'll use Brian, like he's moving across the country to pursue his acting career.
Yeah.
Like that would never happen if he had not gone through the Unbreakable Man, because he would have been terrified of himself. And, the fear within him is the only thing stopping him at the end of the day. I was going on a good tangent there. Well, I totally forgot the question.
Why? We're dancing around so much right now. It's totally fine.
Yeah.
And I love how you're talking about the transcendence of man. And I grew up when toxic masculinity was a huge liberal movement, like 2010 to 2020. That's when I went to university, right? And I had a lot of guilt, a lot of shame about being a man, because being a man was bad because of that. But it was the grown-up boy man, right? It was the competition man. It was, the man who wasn't integrated with himself, right? The man who just wants to only fuck girls as the means to the end, right? Yeah. That's all there is, or the pornography, right? Because we do have this sort of, you said it, brother, we kind of do have this destructive nature about ourselves if we aren't integrated. And there's a quote that I love, which is, all great men die twice.
Yes.
You die first time when the boy become a man, and then you live your sublime masculine self, which is what this world needs now more than anything. Yeah. And, in the spiritual communities, they're talking about is the age of feminine, right? The Aquarius movement and stuff. But, I really think it's the transcendence of masculine. That's really what the world needs first and foremost right now, to hold the container for that feminine. And because the transcendent masculine is more feminine, that's what I love about you. You are just supreme. Like, you have that warrior, the masculine. I've seen it, man. It is strong as fuck. Right, but you are also like one of the goofiest guys I know, bro. Like you are straight up, and like that transcendent man is very feminine as well. Yeah. So
yeah, it is, and I remember what we were talking about. We were talking about kind of the need for men to unlock themselves, to show up in the world with a sense of purpose, and for women, it's sort of like an innately already there. Like they don't need to break themselves down mentally, physically, emotionally in order to find who they truly are. It's like going psychologically from boyhood to manhood. It requires, and it's really interesting. I'm still, and as I'm watching women, this is a quick side note, as I'm watching women ascend, when I say ascend, I mean move into higher levels of consciousness. I'm witnessing incredible power, incredible beauty. And frankly, it's like, I think men have to show the fuck up, because these women now,
they're coming
man,
on,
they're coming online, and they're like, holy shit, if we want to even just hold a flame, to like, holy shit, like we need to show the fuck up. And I think about some of my dear friends that are showing up right now, and just watching them and witnessing them. And it's like our divine gift as men is to hold containment and when I say containment, I mean safe space, and for the feminine to rise.
Yeah.
It's the soil, for which the nutrients are there so that the life force energy in the seed can rise and create the new tree of life. And, without that, a seed is a seed. You can put it on the shelf and it's just a seed. It's potential. But without that masculine containment being the soil and the nutrient that comes forward through that in the darkness, without that and that safe space, right? Like you think about a young tree sapling, it can be destroyed by like a deer stepping on it or like a big gust of wind, it's like, so it's our mission, our divine right mission to hold safe space for women to rise. Now, this does not mean, this is really fucking important right now. This does not mean that men are less than women. It does not mean that. I'm about to jump through this fucking
Let's
microphone
go.
and make sure you understand the fuck out of this. This means that men and women are are becoming unionized as one whole. Again, this is not the divine, like, the divine hermaphrodite in the sense of we're all going to become transhuman. It does not mean that either. What it means is that inside of all of us, we have a right lobe to our brain, a left lobe to our brain, a hemisphere rather, and inside of that is the corpus callosum that transcends time and space. And we are now becoming not just left brain dominant or right brain dominant. We are actually unionizing these two sides of our brain, meaning the masculine energies and the feminine energies are unionizing. However, whether male or female, again, this is biologic, right? Like XX chromosome, XY chromosome, whether male or female, whether man or woman, you have to do the same fucking work. Women actually have to do masculine work in order for them to feel safe within their own vessel, to have boundaries, to rise within themselves and express that femininity. It is no different. Now, this is why the argument for male, female, masculine, feminine is so like convoluted.
Yeah.
Everybody's kind of throwing everything into the pot and stirring it up and being like, oh, we should have tampons for trans boys. And I'm like, for me, I'm like, what? Like, no, trans boys don't menstruate. Like, they don't menstruate, right? Like, we don't need tampons for trans boys. We need to understand what masculinity, because, and here's the thing with the trans movement. This is really important because, like a lot of people are really, really upset about this conversation right now. But it's just everybody's throwing stuff into the psychics, this like pot, stirring it up, and then there's a lot of confusion of terms. Ultimately, at the end of the day, the trans movement is showing up because psychically we're ascending. Our consciousness is ascending. They've ascended, like they came on like onto this planet knowing that something was up, knowing that we are both man and woman, right? Like, again, like psychologically, again, that's subjective versus objective. And so then they started a conversation, and then they're taking the subjective world and trying to make it objective.
Yeah.
Right. Which then creates a lot of confusion for everybody. They're like, now who am I? Right. And then you think about 2010 to 2020, what you were talking about with the toxic masculinity space, right? Now it's like everybody's questioning, well, what does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to be masculine? But what it's doing is that it's opening up the conversation about this stuff. Now, what I'm explaining right now is just my perspective on the trans movement had to happen in order for us to even have this conversation today, right? So we can't bash on the trans movement. Like, that's very, very important. I'm not, like, in fact, my nephews.
Yeah, no, you're clear on that. Yeah.
Like, this is really important. And I say this even with you guys. We had to happen in order for us to have this conversation. What is very apparent, though, is that we now need to understand that they're trying to create, like, what they're trying to create and what we're trying to create, and they can actually live simultaneously in harmony, but they have to work simultaneously. Can't have one without the other. Both of which are looking for freedom. Both of which are looking for authentic expression. And that's why I'm so wide open. It's like, it has to happen, but you also can't argue male woman or man woman. You can't argue it, right? And a lot of people are trying to argue it nowadays. But psychically, you can argue it all day. You can say masculine, feminine, more masculine, more feminine. It's like, I don't know. Like, I don't know if you're carrying more masculinity, more femininity. But all that to be said, that when a woman is coming online and ascending, she also has to tap into her masculine structures in order for her to feel safe within the self. Because yes, it is our divine right to hold space for the feminine to rise. It is also within the context of the individual to do that work for themselves, right? Like I can't tell you have to do that, right? It has to be an innate knowing that you are ready, that you know. Like that's why I asked, like early on in this conversation, like what was the call? How did you know?
Yeah,
right? You know, it's like, and then you're like,
that's like, but the knowing is also like, you know, because it's not intellectual per se. Like it's hard to you can't really put into words. It's more of that driving. You talked about the tension, right? There's just that tension between what your soul wants versus what you are, and that which I can't express in words is that, right? It's the tension of that line.
Yeah.
Awesome. No, if we can, and we have like 30 minutes left here, so I want to touch on some other topics too. I did want to talk about that with the with man and woman, the objective, the subjective. So, but I think we talked a lot about that. So I'm glad you did. That was awesome. I do want to go back a little bit more to the retreat now, because and we talked about some things, right? But I think I've given people context to the retreat and the different experiences that people have. You know, there's 3 categories that I thought of, and I think there's different ones as well. And I think I'll open this up. Maybe you can share someone's experience so we can kind of get an understanding of this masculine process, right? 'Cause I think we talked about the initiation, the ritual, you know, why men need it, but kind of like give people a little bit more detail about, you know, specific experiences.
Yes.
So there's 3 that I thought of, and that's the coming of age, boyhood to manhood, which we talked a ton about. And maybe I think you could talk about the guy's experience from the last one, because that was amazing. And you had this really cool also psychological explanation of when the man comes online and things like that. The second is like the father, husband, the business owner, right? And I saw one of your posts, you have kind of like 2 different things, which is success, but they sacrifice a part of themselves, right? That's common. And then you have the lacking meaning connection, usually with a partner, maybe with family, you know, as well. You know, the father who has provided for his family, but gets no damn respect or can't get any connection, right? So you had the coming of age, the boyhood to manhood. I was definitely on that. You know, the grown man who is just either success but sacrificed, and then or the lacking meaning. And then third, which I really want to talk about when we talk about the trans, is the gay men. How many gay men have shown up to these retreats, because that's another thing that shows about the holistic approach you're taking is different. And that I was surprised about is, you know, there was 2 gay men a part of our retreats, and there's been other gay men, but how many gay men are actually coming to these retreats? Because a lot of people wouldn't think about that.
Yeah, and we can even touch there. Like about 30% of our clients in the Unbreakable Man are gay, right? Homosexual in that context from a sexuality perspective. But ultimately, at the end of the day, they still identify as male, as man, right? And they're like, well, I'm chastised in the gay community, because like there's a lot of conversation even within the gay community and the LGBTQ community. There's a lot of like, you know, conversation of, and here's the thing, like when there's conversation but there's no objectiveness in it, like you gotta honor the objective, but you don't need to like attach to it. Right. I need to honor this chair, but I don't need to attach to it. If I attach myself psychologically to it, now I'm giving power to the chair. And so when I do that in the same context, it's like if I attach myself to this body and something happens to this body, then I get really upset. I'm giving power away to it. So we need to honor it, but we don't need to attach to it. The big difference there. And so for these guys that are coming in, and there's been quite a few, and you know, a couple of the guys that have you know shared with me, it's like even if they weren't openly gay, they share with me on the side that they had questions, you know, and like okay. The key is that we are providing safe space and safe containment for these men to express themselves and identify who they are. That's the key. Again, it's like the grand question, who am I? You know, and we are simply providing a construct for men to understand their masculine structures. But it also means that after they identify their masculine structures, like let's tune into what that femininity means. And we do talk about femininity, and a lot of people looking on the outside, like I you know, it's really funny. Like my shaman, you know, he not approached me, but like he commented on one of our posts on Instagram, because I'm friends with him on Instagram. And he was like, you know, questioning some things, and you know, and I love, and he's very, very gay. Like when I say very gay, I'm like, you know, I guess I don't want to put like levels of gayness, but you know, it's
10 out of 10.
10 out of 10, right? And I love, like, I would do anything. I would do anything for this shaman, right? And because he's such an incredible soul, like he held me in the like the darkest space, you know, like the way a shaman can. And he was questioning this, and I knew that he knew that I knew, right? But basically, like, we're doing the same work. We're doing absolutely the same work, whether it's in the shamanic space of psychoactive medicines or plant medicines and theogens, or we are working with, you know, just understanding masculine and feminine energies. It's like we're doing the same work. When I bring men through, I help them identify who they are. I help them reckon with all of the parts of their shadow that stop them from expressing themselves, and help them show up now and fully express themselves as who they are. And two of the guys that came through, one of which, Brandon, the other Brandon in y'all's group, he had experienced a great deal of religious trauma.
Yeah,
especially because he was an openly gay man, but he went through, you know, I don't know the name of it, but it's like a camp that you go and like they try to ungay you. You know, it's
wow.
Yeah, he mentioned that, and he went through that, and it was a very traumatic experience for him. But he tried it. But again, you can't try to fuck yourself, basically. It's like, when I say that, it's like when there's something on your heart, you can't try to undo what is your truth. You can't try to untruth your truth.
Yeah.
Your truth is your truth. And like, you need to honor the fuck out of that. And I need, you know, if I have a desire, you know, personal egoic desire, is that everybody knows their truth and everybody feels free to express what that truth is in a healthy way. And healthy is cooperative, right? It's not competitive. And so for him, it was like, I am man, I am warrior, I am strong, but I'm also a lover. I'm also tender. I'm also soft and playful, right? Goofy, you know? And so we are all these things. And so when we become men, but we're still terrified of, you know, being hurt, we push the boy aside and we think what masculinity is, and being like a man is now like, well, now I'm physically powerful, so nobody fuck with me, so now I'm going to be cooperative. But the thing that we all need is actually to open up our hearts. And so I know for him and for Brian and for all the other guys that have come through that are, you know, are gay, they feel so at ease and so at peace that they can be held by another man without confusion, without sexual interest, and they can hold another man without confusion and sexual interest. They can look into another man's eyes without shying away, and they can feel steadfast and present in that, knowing that I can be both intimate without being romantic. And it's very, very difficult, especially for straight men, to go into that space. But that's what we provide, that safe containment for men to do that, to go into that space. And I'm not saying like the last group, nobody in that group was gay, but for all the other groups, we always had at least one. And to do work like that in that intimate space, you know, it requires the warrior to be strong enough to like hold space for however somebody needs to show up, right? And like, just let them be who they are. And that's the part of, like, if there is any one healing thing, is like, be witnessed in your own humanity, in your own like shadow, in your own like fear of who you are. Be witnessed in that in a compassionate way, and you would be amazed. That's why, you know, talk therapy does work. I mean, it works to a certain extent. There's a lot of other things that work better, I think, but it's just, you know, it's a reason that we actually are, you know, we started this brotherhood. It's actually like now in a more like there had to be more of that on a regular basis, because the retreats that we were running were, you know, every other month, and, you know, getting guys there and recruiting them. It's like I knew that there was an opportunity for more men to be experienced. And when I say experienced, I mean like to be seen in their own humanity, for them to show up authentically, for them to open their heart, but also like, let's fucking throw around some weights, man. Like, let's go like bash some weights, jump into some ice bath, and then like, we're, you know, now we're going to experience some things. We're going to be authentic, you know. And then once a month, what we do is we get together and we do some deeper healing. And that's where we're going to do things like breath work, and we're going to have, you know, conversations around relationship and finance and business, and, you know, all the nuance of life. We got to do that. Like, that's the objective world that our divine gift is taking the subjective and making it objective. as I like to say, take the non-physical and make it physical. That's the fun part. It's like so juicy. It's like, ooh, how do I make the non-physical physical?
Yeah.
Right. That's a quick side note. And so that's a long answer to a short question, which is, gay men come to the Unbreakable Man because they feel safe, they feel seen, they feel understood.
And I think they really want to own their masculinity in a way that I think they haven't had the opportunity to, because Brandon was saying this too. He had religious trauma as well, but he also had men trauma, because once he came out, his masculine friends kind of then rejected him.
Absolutely.
Because of that, because of our kind of immature masculine, which is what you said too, confusing intimacy with maybe sexual interest, right?
Yeah.
And so what I saw in Brian and Brandon, maybe other one is, you say it a lot, men need men. Doesn't matter if you're gay men, straight men, men need men.
Yes.
And then even, gay men need to own their masculine, like the objective masculine. And they're seeking that. They're craving that. Both Brian and Brandon were craving that. Brandon really, it was so beautiful when he came out and was just like, I just want to be around men and I don't have any sexual interest. And he really came out because, like, I guess the men that he'd been around, I've been guilty of that probably when I was younger as well.
Yeah.
Is, not, being friends with a gay man because of, I just thought that it just wasn't in my reality. It wasn't something that I was able to do,
Yeah.
And I loved learning that at your retreat. I got really close with Brandon and Brian. I still talk to Brian. Brian texted me today but, I just thought that would, not surprised, but I think, the gay men that come to your retreats are, learning from them, learning about their experience, and then also their craving for the masculine as well. It's really beautiful that I think a lot of people don't think about when you're talking about, masculinity or something like the Unbreakable Man. Because,
absolutely, yeah. And again, like, that's why I started with a conversation of, like, masculine is different than man.
Yeah.
Right. Masculinity is subjective, and we must bring that online. We must understand that subjective experience of what masculinity truly is subjectively.
Yeah.
And it's a felt sense, and then you embody that. And then you're free to express yourself however you want because you're safe.
Yeah.
You are safe within the self. And so then you can, I like to say, like, sort of like the Matthew McConaughey, you can take your shirt off and bang bongos in your front yard. It's like, I can just, like, sit here and play and be goofy and, like, have fun. And so now I feel free to do that, and I feel free to be whoever the fuck I am. Like, I'm really excited for when my TED Talk comes out. I'm just, like, kind of putting that out in the universe. When my TED Talk comes out, because it's just going to be a sense of authentic expression. That's really what it is. It's like teaching people what true freedom really is.
Mm-hmm.
And there's like, think about TED Talks. It's like very, very, like, structured. You got to, like, speak a certain way. And it's like, and that's how we get across to people. And yes, there must be structure in order for within the structure then is free form, right? Like, and the free formness is really the, kind of the functional unit. As an example, right? Like, if I have a cup of coffee, right? Like, the functioning unit of the coffee is in the, the liquid inside, but the cup is the thing that actually makes it useful. And, without the cup, meaning like that masculine structure, the thing that holds containment for it, that thing would just spill all over me, and I wouldn't actually get any of the coffee. I wouldn't get any of the life force from that experience. Yeah. Right. And so you must have containment. And so then the liquid inside is the sort of like the metaphoric, but I guess metaphoric example of what the feminine is. It's the thing that actually sort of like brings, like, we think like the coffee is the thing, but without the cup, there is no coffee. But without, like, you can have an empty cup and you just have an empty cup. We see it all over, it's like, but that's it. But now we must add the liquid, which is the feminine. Yeah. And then in that feminine, now you get the usefulness, and together again it becomes like a useful thing.
So and I know we talked about the coming of age, boyhood to manhood, quite a bit, so you don't have to answer this one as long, but I would love if you could kind of explain psychologically what's happening, maybe use the guy's experience from the last retreat, but kind of that. And I don't know how you explained it on your story, but it was a beautiful, like, psychological, explanation of what is happening when the man comes online.
Maybe give me more, like, specific of what you're, like, was there a specific moment you're talking about?
Well, when he was running through the driveway.
Oh, yeah,
all that. And
okay.
then, like, and I guess he claimed his man at the very, very end, and you could see it, and like, that whole thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So, just for context, in this post, there was this moment with a young man, and he was young. He was 24, 25. I can't remember exactly how old he was, but he was, in this moment ready to step out into the world. And he came to me, and he was still living at home, wanted to be an actor, similar story to kind of with Brian, but he wanted to just step out and be who he wanted to be, but just like all of us, we still project our masculinity and femininity in general. I won't say in general, actually, all of us do it because we psychologically need our parents, and physically we need our parents when we're young, but then we get attached to our parents. And so for us to rise as a man, like true manhood, we must let the ideal of the gods, which we put as man or mom and dad, like we see them as masculine and feminine gods. And so we think that we're going to get all the nourishment that we need from them, but we're not. Just we understand, like when you go into manhood, right? And so in order to truly step out into the world, you must allow for the divine masculine within you to come forward so that the inner wisdom of the divine feminine can also rise. And so, and again, whether male or female, biologic, you still need to do masculine work. Like women need to do masculine work, and then they do feminine work, right? And it's my I guess like theory that you need to do masculine work first, and then you do feminine work. And I see a lot of women getting out there and getting after it, doing all these things. But for this one, example, he had this, I'll kind of give you the story. When you show up to our program, I give you a certain set of standards. Again, just understanding what standard is, understanding that you must live in integrity with that. I help guys understand physically what that is, because, words are cheap, right? Like, and even somebody listening to this, like, they'll like kind of get hit and they're like, yeah, but like, go experience it, go live it. That's why that 3-day experience is so powerful, because you experience it. Psychologically, I can teach you all day, but then you experience it. And so for this young man, we have a certain set of standards, and he did not live up to one of the standards. And then I started calling him out. What's up, man? What's going on? Right? And he was like, you could like see like, and nobody likes that feeling of getting called out. And then like, and I'm doing that as an opportunity to bring forward his pattern, because I want to see where his pattern is. And for him, it's fawning. And so we all have a trauma response, and some of us fight, some of us freeze, some of us, like freak out, right? And they want to run. And the other ones, they fawn. And fawning is being more agreeable. You're like, yeah, you're right. Yeah, you're right. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. I'll do better next time. I'm like, no, but like fawning is the opposite of fighting. Now, I don't want him to fight, but I want him to find that fucking warrior.
Yeah.
Right. So for him, the passive pole, when I say the passive pole of the warrior shadow comes forward, which is the weakling, right? Like the true weakling, which will later blow up, because passive and active pole will later blow up. It'll blow up in the form of like, he'll get into a fight when he doesn't need to get into a fight.
Yeah.
Like he needs to know what his warrior is capable of. Now, again, that warrior is showing up in this archetype, is showing up as a guardian against something deep within himself, which is very painfully hurt. So his inner child has been hurt psychologically, and he does not feel safe to express himself as a warrior. Right? You think about like that sensation, right? And so he, in the context of getting into a fight, like, and I say fight, but like it's like almost like a protectorship of his own boundary, his own standard of him living the life that he wants, is required, like you were mentioning, when you went to go have a conversation with your bosses, like, no, this isn't all right. Like, we need to have this conversation.
Yeah.
And you don't need to be an asshole about it, but you also don't need to be passive about it. And you're like, look at this. Like, let's have this conversation. Like, what's happening? What's the value? Okay, I'm adding the value. Like, do it. Say it. And then they're like, whoa, like, this guy means fucking business. You're like, yeah, like, and I'm going to add more value. You see this tone right now. And so why that tone is so important, because it's steadfast. You're not attached to the outcome, but you are there as a warrior, right? You're there to hold boundary. And so for this young man, he was in the passive pole of the warrior shadow. Again, that weakling, right? It's like he's just not showing up. And so what he's going to do in relation is that he's either going to blow up or he's going to be passive aggressive, and he just is people pleasing in that moment. So I have a way, I have many ways, but I have a way that I enjoy, that I bring guys out and I call them out and I call them out and I call them out and I look them in the eye and I call forward and I start embodying the warrior. Now, mind you, when you work in the psychic space, you can start channeling energies. And when you start channeling energies, it's fucking amazing, right? You know, so like I know how to do it. I've been doing it for a while now, but I started channeling the warrior, and I started I started pulling him out. I started grabbing his shirt.
Yeah.
And I said, "Stop fucking appeasing me." And then he like kind of caught it, like, "Oh, I'm appeasing." Like, "Oh," like, and I yelled at him, like not yell, but like I affirmatively expressed myself.
Yeah.
"Who the fuck are you?" And then he's like, you know, and I was like, "Who the fuck are you?" And I look him in the eye, and I get like whoosh, and I am channeling, like I no longer in that moment become Dave. I step aside, and I embody the essence of warrior, right, in that moment. But in that container, right, there's still boundary, you know. So I know, like, if he's gonna try to beat me up, I'm just gonna. It's almost like Neo in the Matrix. Like I can see his energy, and I can see my energy before anything happens. So I say, "Move through me." Move through me. And I start like getting louder, "Move forward," right? And I'm like yelling at him, and it's like the more he pushes, the like I'm sort of like letting him not push me, but like letting his aggression come forward.
Yeah.
And then I escalate. So as the job of a facilitator is simply just to meet somebody where they are and help them find themselves 1% more. And then they go up, and then go 1% and 1%. Until there's a crescendo, and there's always a crescendo. And in that moment, there's like just screaming, yelling,
yeah.
And
he pushed you down the whole driveway.
He pushed me down the whole driveway. But you know, that was like, you know, guided practice. And at the end, he broke down, like emotionally broke down, and the tears started coming because the guardian of the pain, which was holding all this tension, could step aside, and that pain can come forward and it can be witnessed. Yeah. And so I just held him. Yeah. I held him in that moment, and I just let him cry. I was like, "You're free. You're free. You no longer have to run from that pain," because it wasn't the warrior that was actually there. It was the warrior that was trying to guard from the pain that was underneath that, of him not being worthy, of him not being valuable enough, of him, you know, like, and so how that would show up psychologically was that he wouldn't show up in the world as the steadfast man that he knew he could be. And so when that comes forward, he can embrace that, let that release. There's a cathartic release. There's a grieving process always. And after, on the other side of rage, right, there's that deep sadness. And then it's gone, and now all of a sudden it's like, yeah. Like you can just be like, and then you can just be yourself. And then that's where we'll call it the man rises. But, you know, a healthy expression of masculinity can rise.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful story. I love that. And watching the video, man, it was really awesome. And you're really good, you know. I don't use the word provoking, but that you sort of inching people up to where they need to be.
Yeah.
You're really good at that. And I mean, the best I've seen, because you hold such safe space, but you're also demanding people to show up for themselves with the standard, right? Where you're allowing, you know, total, you know, freedom. You know, you don't want people to go farther than what they can at that moment, but you're also very you get them to go as far as they can. Yes. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And at other retreats, other spaces I've been to, they're a little bit more, you know, kind of coddling, you know, where, and you don't have this super, like, you know, you're not doing push-ups all day. It's not this super like grunt work, but it's like, hey, we're here because, you know, this is actually what you came for. You didn't know this, but this sort of guardian, this sort of passive warrior pole is actually why you're here.
Yes.
And so let's meet that, right?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and there's a lot of different ways in which guys right now are, you know, facilitating men, and there's no wrong answer. I want to start there.
Yeah.
You know, it's like you'll get something out of value if you go to, like, again, Jocko Willing's, you know, deal. It's like you'll get a ton of value. In fact, I'd love to go to one of the echelon front, you know, what they call them, the musters. I just have a different method because I know who you are. Right?
Yeah.
Like I just know it, and I know how to get there. Like and it's not the, that I'm special or any of that. It's like when a chef knows how to put together a really good meal. It's something that's in me that I just know how to like support and facilitate. I understand the emotional landscape so intimately because I've done so much work on myself that I know what shame feels like and I know what guilt feels like. And so I can guide and facilitate really anyone, to be honest. I genuinely enjoy working with men, but I absolutely facilitate women all the time too.
Yeah. I think the difference in yours is there's like a real healing component. Like when you talk about, maybe the Jocko, I don't know what Jocko does, right? So this is just more, generalization, but it's kind of like when we first talked about the conflict. You want to conflict the weakling, right? You have a weakling. I mean, I don't want to be weak anymore. And so you do maybe ice baths every day because you want to take care of the weakling, right? Or the quote unquote inner bitch we talked about.
Yeah.
Whereas you have a true healing component, right? Healing me to be made whole again, which is you fully experience the weakling. You allow it to express. You don't need it anymore. Then you break down. There's usually pain or something behind that, right? And that's, healing at its best. Whereas, a lot of the more traditional who don't come into, because you were, when you first started out, a shaman, like the true kind of healing type of environments, like you don't actually heal that weakling. You're always trying to beat it or conflict it rather than it's just not there anymore. Right.
Yeah. And it's like I said, it's like my gift. And we were, you and I were talking about, we can go like wax on this all day, which is like, I just uncovered this whole new chapter of my life, which is, through this book called The Gene Keys.
Yeah.
And I see how what you're just describing is actually my life's work. And I see,
clearly,
it's like, because like my, the thing that I'm so good at and what you're describing is like men that are fighting against their inner bitch are still going to experience that parasitic tension, which is stress. And stress is the number one thing that causes early death. We just know that. It's not only early death, but it reduces function. It creates burnout. It is the process of inflammation in the body is stress. And so my gift is the gift of presence and restraint. And when I say restraint, I mean like restraint from trying to access something that's not outside of you. And so when you go through, that's again, just like my gift, again, according to these, but I can see how all of this shows up in the way I facilitate. And in that case, it's the ability to be present with the emotion is the restraint, right? It's like, can I be present with this?
Yeah.
Can I experience this? Can I, instead of trying to fight against my inner bitch, can I honor that and be like, well, what am I running from? What am I terrified of in that moment? Like, why do I think it's a little bitch? Like what, if I judge it as bitch, what am I actually terrified of? Oh, I'm terrified of being seen as weak. And if I'm weak, then I can be destroyed. It's like, all right, well, fuck it. Let's get destroyed. Let's fucking destroy me. Right. Like, and I've been in the psychic space enough and I prefer to use breath work, psychoactive compounds like psilocybin. I've sat in ayahuasca, I've used bufo, I've used all these, plant medicines and even in meditation. And I do that so that I can understand the depth of my fears. And then in understanding that and understanding what that experience is like within me, I know it absolutely like, it's like a character that, you get in, like you're going on a grand journey and there's like this crazy waterway that you need to navigate through. And like you get in with the boat captain and I'm that fucking crazy boat captain. I'm like,
you are.
All right, y'all, let's get on in the boat. We're going to have some rocket waves. What's going to be a great time? Let's go. And, it's so fun to help people navigate. And they're terrified. They're like, oh my God. They're like on the boat, of like their emotions and their reckoning. And they're like, I don't know if I can handle this. I'm like, come on, you're doing great. Let's go. And then they get to the other side. They're like, that was wild. Dude. And then, and then they feel seen, they feel safe, they feel heard, they feel free to pursue the next chapter of their life, whatever that is. And so I always say, if you're choosing a teacher or a guide or a guru, choose them for the time that you need them. And then move on, it's, I always like to think that I want to, be with the guys as long as I possibly can. That's actually why I started the brotherhood, to support. But even if guys get, they get to the end of that journey and they're like, I don't need this brotherhood anymore. I'm going to go start my own, or I'm going to go do something different. You know, by all means, man, go for it. You know, so it's really important, you know, whenever you're choosing a guide, get across, you know, the waterway with that guide, and then, you know, stop trying to carry that boat